Welcome, y'all, to our discussion today on attracting and retaining top talent, the untapped potential of neurodiversity. We're so glad to have you here. I know Ed and I are excited to get going. Ed, would you want to kick it off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. It's I see a couple of us familiar smiling faces here. My name's Ed Krow. I'm the talent transformation expert for organizations seeking eight-figure growth. I'm so happy to have been introduced to Stina a number of months back, and we've got so much in common in the way that we approach our work, and the chance to collaborate on this webinar was just something that was really exciting for me, and it's hard to believe that 2 months later, the day's already here.
Poof, here we go. And I just skipped over. I always like to start also with our community agreements. So I'm going to go back to that real quick. So keeping our microphones on mute, turning your cameras on. I love seeing it. I don't know about you, because I love having that nonverbal communication. It's really helpful for that connectivity as we meet. Use the chat for any questions, comments related to our topic, and of course, be respectful and friendly with each other. I'm Stina Borth, and I have the pleasure of meeting Ed, like you said, 7 months ago, and we've had wonderful conversations. I am the CEO and founder of Keymaker Services, and what we do is we specialize in productivity and neurodiversity. So we guide leaders and their teams through neuroinclusion and how to unlock potential through learning practices of the cognitive differences that we all have within neurodiversity. We really lean into enjoying flexibility and the complexity of life and really honoring identities while leveraging those strengths. And I always like to throw in a little bit of my outside of work self. I'm a badass fisherwoman. I'm going to claim that. I love playing darts, water sports, hiking, dancing, and I'm a proud auntie. I'm actually third-time auntie this last month, so that's also very, yeah. What we're focusing on today is understanding and embracing neurodiversity, tips for developing those executive functioning skills in the workplace, and implementing our best practices of neuroinclusion. So before we jump in, I like going through the neuros, because this jargon we want to make sure we're all on the same page. There's 4 main ones. Neurodiversity, and I tend to do an acting out with this. So neurodiversity is that overarching umbrella. It's a term that talks about the range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits and skills. And it's actually something that's regarded as being a normal variation in the human population. So we have overarching neurodiversity. And then on one end of this neurodiversity, we have neurodivergent. And neurodivergent is a term that we use to describe a person whose brain function is differently than maybe the majority of the population. A lot of times this is a term we use to describe somebody that might have a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, OCD, social anxieties, dyslexia, etc. And then on the other end of this spectrum, we have neurotypical. So neurotypical just means it's someone that's not neurodivergent. And we also want to be mindful of is when we talk about being neurotypical, lots of times folks have not been diagnosed. They might be somewhere else on this spectrum, and they haven't realized or they haven't maybe identified with that label. But we have those two polar opposites. And then the last one is neuroinclusion. So neuroinclusion is this term that we use to describe the effort of recognizing the diversity in our cognitive differences and our abilities. And we want to include it and leverage it in cultivating an inclusive environment in the workplace. The next piece that really comes to play, and what we've often focus when we're talking about neurodiversity, is executive functioning skills. And these skills really, I talk about them being the glue. They're the glue of any productive team, productivity skills. And really what they are is we try them as the mental process that enables us to plan, to focus our attention, to redirect our attention, remember instructions, and complete multiple tasks. Everybody has executive functioning skills. but we tend to have some areas more developed than others. And it's kind of like these skills we got to go to the gym to work them out, to maintain them and keep them strong so that we can complete projects and we can work together. The main areas that are under those executive functioning skills are planning and prioritization, organization, time management, and I'm picking off of that another tentacle is time awareness, working memory, so being able to retain information long enough to apply it, metacognition, thinking about our thinking, self-management, attention management, flexibility, mental flexibility, perseverance, goal-directed perseverance, and task initiation. So with this glue that we know holds all of our productivity together, we have a poll set up that I would love some input from the rest of you folks. Is this topic of executive functioning skills, is this something that's being addressed by your leader or your team, maybe, or you've heard of it? They're jumping all over the place. Keep them coming. See where we land.
And not surprised by that ratio.
Yep, not surprised at all. So 18 regularly, somewhat 53. So the highest of some, so we talk about some of them, maybe not others. That's also something that when we lean into of what are those areas that are underdeveloped that could really benefit our productivity and performance. I love the no, I wish, 29%. So, all right, let's see. Thank you for that input. Here we go. Okay, share the results. So now that we have those executive functioning skills defined, and we know what all the neuros are, talking about the application and develop of these skills. So now we know what they are, how do we get into them? How do they benefit us? And you have so much knowledge around organization of skills and time management. I'd love for you to dive in and share some of your knowledge here.
Yeah, sure. So, when I think about the executive functioning skills that Stina mentioned, and the very first two, if you picked up on it, were planning and prioritization as one, and organization and time management as 2 and 3. And when we think about what makes us successful in the workplace, whether we are in a professional level job, whether we are on an assembly line, we're working in fast food, I mean, really whatever industry you're coming from, there has to be an element of your organizational skills and your ability to manage time to complete your tasks and priorities. And I know from the work that I do in developing managers and executives, one of the things that always seems to bubble to the top with people who are not performing at their peak are their organizational skills and or their time management skills. And so we know that those skills are some of the key skills that we need to strengthen in order to be functioning at our peak. And so when we look at these things, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing for our team to increase their organizational skills and or their time management? Now, Stina mentioned time awareness, and I'm going to let her talk on that in a little bit, because time awareness is different than time management. So we're not going to confuse those two terms, but I'm also not going to steal her thunder, okay? So when you think about someone's organizational skills, sometimes people go right to the, oh, well, that person has a messy desk. They're not organized, okay? But then there's also the person who is the Einstein and everything's a mess, but they know exactly where everything is and where to put their hands on. So are they really unorganized, or are they just organized in their own way, right? That's a different way than we might organize our desk. So when I think about organizational skills, and when I'm coaching an executive who would appear to lack them, I'm more concerned about the ability or lack thereof that they have to organize their day, to organize their priorities, and to organize their daily tasks to achieve goals. And so when I look at those things, and I relate that back to time management, my question for them is always, are you spending time doing the things that are important? Right. And so there's the connection between organizational skills and true time management. Am I able to prioritize, on one hand, the organization of tasks that I need to accomplish? And on the other hand, can I organize myself, my day time-wise, in order to complete those tasks? So I'll tell you, I've been out the last several days between travel for clients and some personal stuff. So you know what that's like, right? You get back, your email box is pretty jammed up, and you got all this stuff you've got to get done. And I remember sitting here yesterday and looking at my computer, and I almost went into, I don't know what I want to do. So here's a guy that coaches executives on how to organize things. And I just had that brain moment of, what should I do first? Right? Yeah, Tina's looking going, yeah.
It's that freeze. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, what is the matter with you? But we all go through it. And so regardless of whether you individually feel that you identify as neurodivergent or neurotypical, it doesn't mean that we don't all have challenges on a given day with where we're at mentally, right? Maybe you had a bad night's sleep. Well, we know that's going to bring your ability to decision make and do things in a timely manner, down a little bit. And so there's so much that can go into there. And one of the things that there's a client that I'm coaching with right now with their executive team, and everything I keep hearing from them is, we get sucked into the chaos of the day, Ed. How do we stay out of the chaos of the day? Well, some of that is your prioritization, but a lot of that is also communication. So, for instance, last week I was on site with them, and we gave them an exercise, and it was just one of these fun things, right? Build a tower, and we gave them a bunch of stuff, balloons and popsicle sticks and straws and paper plates, just a bunch of weird things. Said, okay, build a tower as tall as you can out of this stuff. Well, what did we do to introduce chaos? So we let them have their team time in order to figure out how they're going to build this, right? What they didn't know was that periodically, we had, I think, 3 or 4 groups going with this, I would just walk over and say, hey, Stina, come with me. And she would stop what she was doing. She'd come with me. I'd say, and there'd be a 50-piece puzzle laying on a table. Hey, go do that puzzle for a little bit. And Stina would look at me and be like, what's this got to do with that? I'm like, nothing. But go do that. That's your job right now, right? And we started doing that. And so when we debriefed, they were all like, Ed, what was that even about? Well, isn't that what daily life is like? Right? You get focused on something and you get yanked away. Now, in this case, I was telling you, but none of you thought to say, hey, Ed, what's my priority here? Is my priority going with you to work on that puzzle, or is my priority staying with my team and helping them build this tower? Because had someone asked me that, I would have said, stay with the team, build the tower. That's the priority. And so it was a neat learning thing that sometimes when we think about the chaos of the day, we allow ourselves to get pulled into that. And we allow that to run our day. And that's not necessarily a reflection that we're poor time managers or we have poor organizational skills. It comes back to the prioritization type thing. And perhaps the lack of planning. I don't know how many of you, and I'm not throwing darts here. Stina likes to throw darts. She might throw darts at you. But if you have the alerts on your email box, right, that pop up every time an email comes in, you're getting ping, 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 right? I don't know how folks operate like that. And when I'm coaching via Zoom and I hear someone's pinging, I say, is your email box open? Because you need to close that. This is our time to focus, right? And so some of the technology tools that we have available to us create some of the very chaos that pulls us away from our organization and time management. And those constant pings, whether it's the text messages or the alerts every time that there's an in message or an email coming in, that's taking away from our ability to focus and prioritize. And so let's run into this next poll, if we could, please. We want to look at how you'd rate your time and attention management skills. And this is anonymous, y'all, so we don't know who's answering what here. You can be honest. Okay, so we've got mostly like 3s and 4s in there. Not bad. Not bad. One honest person there says 4. Okay. And 2 2s. Right. So we're all on a different continuum when it comes to this. And so when we think about our ability to manage that time and manage our attention, I like to bring it back to what are your priorities? What are you staying focused on throughout the course of the day? And what are you allowing yourself to get distracted by? Now, there's another focus of this, and this is where I'm going to turn it back over to Stina, and that's this concept called time awareness ratio. And I'm going to be curious after she describes this, how many of you were even aware that this is a thing? Stina, take it away.
So time awareness ratio is one of my favorite tools to use because we all process time. Our nervous system, our brain processes time, has that sense of time that's different. So when we believe it's been a minute, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, it's never, well, I won't say never. It typically, most of the time, is not spot on if you aren't looking at a clock, if you don't have alarms going off. And so understanding how your system processes time and is sensing time is important when you're making predictions of, hey, this project, I need XYZ amount of time. I think this task will take me 30 minutes. And especially when you're working with teams that are relying on you completing one task so they can take it off and do another. Or let's say maybe you're someone that actually is billing a client for X amount of hours. If you don't have an accurate measure, you're not able to manage your time correctly. It's not going to reflect what is truly needed. So using this ratio, what you first do is you do self-observations and you log. I did this type of task and it took me this long. And you do that several times. And then you find, I typically say you can do an average, but if you see there's a couple outliers, medians are best because that's going to throw it all off. Take that number and you're going to take the estimated amount of time that you've said for this type of task. You divide it by that number. It's going to give you a ratio. And so for me, my internal clock processes at a 1.75, meaning that when I think it's been 5 minutes, it's probably been more like 8 to 9 without looking at the clock. So I know that if I feel like a task will take me 30 minutes, I'm going to multiply it by that ratio to be more accurate, to allow myself time. I also bring in, when we talk about using this ratio, a lot of folks think, okay, so I started here, but then I stopped recording the time because I went to the bathroom and then I came back and then I started again. No. That whole transition break time, that's included. Because let's be honest, time doesn't stop in between tasks during our workday. If you get up and that's part of the process of completion. So that's included as well. One of my favorite uses of this is to take this time awareness ratio when you're predicting the amount of time it takes you to complete a task and you're managing it, and then make a weekly schedule design, make a daily schedule design using this ratio. So if I know that I need to complete this report, it's going to take me this amount of time. That's the amount of time that I block it off, and make sure that I'm continuing to come back and taking this data along the way. I do it quite frequently because, like Ed said, things impact us. Sleep, the time of year, the day of the week. We often all have a specific couple days that were highly productive and others that were less. Months as well. So think about the annual cycle. There are months that were more productive. So using that when we're designing our project completions, when we're designing how our timelines will go, is essential. The other piece that comes to play is the attention zone. So most of us have a time of day, or a day, like I said, a day during the week or a period during the month that we are on fire. Our attention is high. We're able to focus. We're able to produce. We're able to sustain that attention. That time needs to be sacred. You protect it where you don't schedule your meetings there. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. You take the tasks that really need you to focus in for completion and you book those there. And then you do everything in your power to protect and eliminate distractions in the environment. That's part of that management as well. So if you know that you're sitting in the middle of the office or your office has a glass door or a window and that's going to impact you, you're going to change that. And then for the times when you notice, my attention is starting to wander. I'm a little less engaged during the day. And I think we all tend to hit something like that. Mine's normally around, 2 o'clock. It's coffee time. I'm in Miami Beach, so cafecito time is at 3 o'clock. That's when we take it. But schedule your meetings then. So meetings tend to be very engaging. You have the input and the output of information, and that is going to boost attention. Whereas that time may have been lost if you said, you know what, I'm going to do my reports at 2 o'clock. Well, now you don't have that peak attention accessible to you. The other piece that comes into play is understanding that there are different types of attention. Most folks don't know that either. Ed, did you know that before we started talking about it, that there's different levels?
Oh, not before we start. I know now because you've educated me.
You don't know. Yeah. So when I bring this up, most folks go, pay attention. I'm like, but what kind of attention? So sustained attention is when you are on one task and you're not drawn anywhere else, just one, it's monotasking. Alternating attention comes into play exactly like with that scenario that you talked about, Ed, where you came up and pulled people off. Mm-hmm. It's when you have a task you're working on, and let's say somebody comes in and says, hey, Stina, I need that question, or I need a response. I go and I address that, and then I redirect back to my main task. So you're alternating between two tasks. A lot of times there's one main one, and then you're addressing something quick and come back. That is a skill, and that is also something that you can train your brain. You can create a pathway to be able to do that quickly. Then the third is divided attention. So that's where you have 2 or more tasks going on that you're managing in the same time. That's multitasking. I have lots of opinions on multitasking. I spend most of my time when working with clients and when we facilitate trainings, it's that sustained and that alternating. The alternating, if you can master that and get to a point where you are successful, that will drive all of your productivity. Because if you can be pulled off and come back, what if, like you said, what if someone said, okay, well, I'll do a couple things in these puzzles, but I really need to come back to my team to work on this. And then the reinforcer.
It was interesting, Stina, to your point there, that when I was moving people around, I had some people that got so focused on the puzzle, and I said, yo, you're done with that, but I'm not done with the puzzle. Yeah, I know, but I'm saying you're done. Go back to your team and send me someone else. They felt odd that they hadn't been given the opportunity to complete that task because they got so focused on that task, they forgot about the team task going on behind them.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually a really good way to do a reset and refresh, to maintain and amp up the attention, is when you are completing a task and then you can shift it to something else and keep reviving that energy. Also and what they were seeking probably was a reinforcer. So reinforcers are where folks access those dopamine hits, and dopamine is the chemical that allows us to focus. It also gives us a pleasure response. If we don't have that access to any of those sources, we can't maintain and we can't complete tasks. And so what they were seeking was the completion of that puzzle was going to give them that dopamine. And they really, really wanted it. And so if we bring those in throughout our day with our tasks as well, and we're mindful of that, knowing, because most of us actually do identify a lot of these reinforcers during our years of development, we're going to be able to continue on. We won't hit that freeze as hard.
Right.
Yeah. And then we can continue producing, right? It's all about maintaining, sustaining, and making sure that we are giving our brains, our nervous systems, what we need to be able to produce and really tap into that true ability.
I was going to ask you a question to foster some discussion, but I want to wait on. So please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I may go right ahead because I was going to go right into our innovation in the
Yeah, no,
workplace.
please,
So,
because it's going to better fit there. So go
okay,
for it.
okay. Keep us moving. So within the workplace, we know that innovation and neuroinclusion, they go hand in hand. And so if we include the nervous system, when we include the information that we know about our own, about our team members, if you're a leader, about your organization, and we include that in how we make decisions, we're going to naturally have more innovations, more ideas, more discussion that's going to result in productivity. When we create awareness of self, so I'm talking about you're looking at yourself, you're aware of this is my time awareness ratio, or this is how my brain is thinking through this process. This environment facilitates productivity for me, and I'm going to eliminate XYZ of distractions. The more we're aware of that of ourselves, then we are also able to take to the next level of awareness of others, like our direct reports, our team members, those that we work with. And then from there, it's organizational awareness. And the more awareness we have, I mean, just from a scientific perspective, the more data we have to make decisions. And so that is the number one. It also is the importance of developing that metacognition, thinking about your thinking and thinking about how others are thinking, which then leads back to what you were talking about with communication. So if you know how your brain works, what your nervous system needs to produce, and you also know that about your teammate or someone you're supervising, you're able to efficiently communicate in a way that's tailored to how that individual can receive the information. So it could be as simple as this person processes information verbally pretty well versus giving them an email or writing it down in text, or vice versa. Or maybe a lot of times what I see is there needs to be some modeling. Let's do this together. And so they're integrating. And then now they're able to autonomously take that task that I've given them and complete it. And that increases productivity. But finding that medium that works best and is beneficial for the whole team, not just this is how I communicate. Because most of us apply just how we know we want to receive information. And then we wonder, hey, I've told this person 3 times to complete this task. Why haven't they done it? Well, because there's no understanding, and then we don't have the communication established to be able to say, I don't know what you're asking or how you're asking, and I'm trying to figure it out. So identifying that best median and then making some differentiation to allow access to the information that's essential for the execution and the completion, and then checking in on that. That goes also, you have a lot for roles of relationships in the teamwork and leadership, along with that communication, I'm sure too, Ed.
Right. I mean, we talk so much in the business world about the importance of effective communication. And there are so many different surveys and assessments out there to figure out your communication style and all that. And they all have their place, obviously. The question is, how do we use our communication skills to build relationships? And so when you think about the theme of today, which is this idea of neurodiversity, the way in which we communicate is one of the things that can make us different and can make things challenging in the workplace. Whether you are an extrovert or an introvert, whether you process things in a very thoughtful way versus you need to talk through them to get things out, right? There are all different ways that we process things and then use that process to communicate. The challenge is, what role does that communication play in our ability to build relationships and build teamwork in the workplace, right? And so here's a perfect example. So again, during this exercise last week, so this client is in Texas, and they have a significant Mexican population in their workforce. And so one of the tables was 6 women and 1 guy, and all the women were Mexican. They got into a point where they started speaking Spanish because it was easier for them to get their thoughts across. Guess what? Gentleman didn't know Spanish. So he is not only from Oklahoma, so he's outside their kind of little niche area. He's a very introverted leader.
Mm.
And now they're speaking a different language. And so when you look at this, it's we were watching this. So in the midst of my puzzle duties, I'm also trying to facilitate that table with another person. And she looks at me and she says, "Wow, Tony is completely lost right now." And my observation was, yes, and he's not stepping in saying, "Hey guys, don't know what you're saying, don't know what's going on." And so when we debriefed after that, the ladies all went, "We didn't even realize we did it." Like it was just so natural for them to go into their native tongue. And there was poor Tony just hanging out, right? And so they didn't do it to be rude. They didn't do it to exclude. It was just a natural thing. And so as part of the debrief, we said, okay, in this organization, a lot of the non-Mexican population does speak Spanish. In this case, though, Tony did. So when I'm there, sometimes they will go in and out of Spanish, or even when they're talking English, they talk really fast. And so there's been times I've had to say, "Hey guys, can you repeat that on like half speed?" And they'll laugh, because I'm trying to process. And so in order to build those relationships with each other, we have to feel vulnerable enough to say, "Hey, I'm not getting the message here," and it might be me, but I'm not getting the message, right? And so as leaders in the workplace, and I know many of you are in leadership positions, we've got to recognize that in ourselves, but also in our teams. If we're seeing that the style of communication or the lack of a relationship is impacting the team's ability to work together. And so what we were seeing in this exercise is people go off, do the puzzle, they come back. Not one group said, "Where did you go? What were you doing? Why were you doing that?" And not one group brought them up to speed on what they had decided was best for building of the tower. And in fact, one group said, "We didn't even know Stina was gone." I mean, how does that make her feel, right? She's been gone from the project for 5 minutes. Nobody even noticed she was gone. And so, but that again, that comes back to this idea of, okay, they were so focused on the task at hand, taping straws together, blowing up balloons, that we were really kind of clueless as to what was going on around us.
Mm-hmm.
And, so when we look at those perspectives, for me, that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to the inclusion of the neurodiverse members of our workforce, or excuse me, the neurodivergent members of our workforce, is, okay, are we communicating in a way that makes sense to them? Are they communicating in a way that we can process? Are we making sure we are including them in the process to build that relationship and that sense of teamwork?
Right. Because I think what you're speaking to in these exercises are great, that we can facilitate and we can lead through it. Because and you probably feel the same way, I'm a facilitator of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And discovering, how do you build those bridges so that you're communicating in this way? How do we build it so that there's a bridge between these two different ways of communication? And then what you just said reminded me of what I just said earlier. It's awareness. If we don't have that awareness of self, we often don't get to that awareness of what's around us and within our team. And so once we have that, then we're able to see, hey, he's not chiming in. Why isn't he chiming in? What is it that we're not able to commute? This is not the right medium, because we're missing out on what he had to offer. And especially if he was in a leadership position, he's not accessing the whole team. He's getting the cliff notes bits by bit.
Exactly.
And we really want it to be fluid. And when it comes to neurodivergent folks, absolutely to understand that. But I also want to kind of come back to understanding that neurodiversity isn't just those with diagnosis. We want to definitely include that. We want these to be options to be pulled out and used to increase connectivity and increase that communication. Because ultimately, communication is about connection and understanding each other. Because with the more connection we have, the more communication we have, the higher performance we have, but we also actually care about the work we're doing as well.
Right. Right. So that leads us on to this idea of best practices, right? So we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that we may be facing in the workplace. And so what I'm curious about, and I want you to think about, is of all the training that you do in the workplace today, whether that's, I see some of you are that I know in the room here are HR practitioners, so I know you're doing things like, compliance related training for sure. And maybe you've done some training around time management or organizational skills, what have you, is have you ever addressed this idea of neuro inclusion and what that means to folks? Have you ever, had someone say, I don't know what's up with that person. They're so quirky. Well, okay, what does that mean? And why is that the perception that they're, quote, quirky, right? Those should all be items that are triggers to say, hey, maybe there's an opportunity here for us to do some training on how do we appreciate that the way people think and the differences in the way we all think is a place where we can really harness some great productivity and some great ideas because we're all coming at things from different angles. And appreciating those angles is really, to me, what's at the center of neuro inclusion. How do we appreciate the perspectives of folks who think just differently than someone else, right? And that really could almost include all of us. We all come at things with a little bit different angle. And so I love it when Stina says, hey, you don't have to have a diagnosis here. We're not talking about, if you're sitting there going, well, I don't have anyone who's autistic in my workplace. Okay, great. Maybe you don't. But that doesn't mean you don't have a neurodiverse workplace because we've got, some of you have organizations maybe where you've got engineers, right? And engineers are known to be very, I'm going to sit in front of the computer. I don't have social skills or whatever. Okay, well, that's a stereotype and we know that. Okay. And some would say it's the same with IT. Okay. But there are certain types of people drawn to certain types of professions. And we know this, right? And so they're able to use their skills to the best of their ability in these different professions. So how do we take all of these ingredients to bring them together to make a really good stew in the workplace? That's what this whole idea of neuro inclusion is really all about. And so when I think about training for neuro inclusion, it's certainly not anything that I come at from a compliance standpoint. Like, oh, you have to do this because if someone is neurodivergent, they might be covered under ADA and therefore it's a compliance issue and blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe all of that is true. I've never been one to play the compliance card. For me, this is all about the competitive edge. How can I harness folks who think, call it outside the box, call it differently, whatever label you want. How can I harness that, right? Someone who thinks differently than me. Because that's where the competitive edge comes in. When we can appreciate the fact that we're all coming at things from different angles and have different perspectives, maybe on the outcomes. And so, Stina, can you throw that next poll up for us here? I want to find out if you have ever done or have, and a key word in this poll is effective training, where maybe even if neuro inclusion is not the focus, it's been in the mix.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting when folks do say, you know what, I don't have anybody that's neurodiverse in my team. And I go, well, that's logic says that's probably not true. You just have not received a disclosure because we know 20% of our population, the general population, so that pond that we're fishing in, I told you I'm a fisherwoman, so it's the same. 20% of them that you're pulling in do have some level of neurodivergence. Now, that's not even going into Gen Z. Gen Z, they're finding the identification rate is like 52%.
Wow.
So when I hear that, and also I had a recent interaction with a leader that said, nope, we hire people that have all those skills, and they don't need more social skills. And it was really interesting because it was different sales positions, very structured. Here's your script, step 1, step 2, and I really, considering the data and also considering this type of structured job that has lots of scaffolding around it.
Mm-hmm.
That is very comfortable for a lot of us that do identify as being neurodivergent. So I would say, well, maybe they're not labeled. Still, they would benefit from this type of awareness to develop the executive functioning skills and productivity. Everybody is.
Yes, looks like our poll has settled in here, and no surprise, we only have one. Excellent for you, one who has done some neuro and inclusive training.
Oh, and I want to know.
And a couple of us have said, yeah, it's in there. We could do a better job, but the majority, and we expected that, aren't doing things. And I'll tell you, since I've gotten to know Stina and the work that she and her team do, and it's one of those things like, if you tell yourself you want to see a yellow Volkswagen Beetle, you'll see 10 of them today, right? But I've been noticing more and more language coming out of SHRM about neurodiversity, neuroinclusion. I mean, so this is, I think, Stina, you've said it's a tidal wave that's coming, right? You are going to continue hearing more about this as an opportunity for us in the workplace to really harness the power of all of our people. So I'm going to turn it back over to Stina. She's going to share a couple of case studies with you here, and to really help you see that how you can get your competitive edge when you start to think about neurodiversity in your workplace and how to develop that inclusion.
Well, what we know, and just in the work that my team and I have done, but also other teams in the neurodiversity space, is that there are very recent studies that when the industry decides, so companies within industries decide to support their neuroinclusion practices, they tend to have access to this whole large pool of talent that they had never tapped into before. And it's people that are, there's a story in mind that's actually coming right up for me about a team member that was brought up to me by a leader, said, you know what? He's got all the degrees, all the training. It looks perfect. This is such a great hire. I cannot figure out why the performance isn't there. What's going on? And just from experience, I immediately went into, well, I think we need to assess the executive functioning skills and figure out what area is underdeveloped, because a lot of times we have these highly intelligent folks and their performance is not matching in the workplace because the workplace isn't quite fitting to allow for that expansion of that area, for that true ability to come out. And so once we are able to identify that, then they have access to their true ability and their team has access to that true ability. And what we're seeing in so many companies across the states, and then I would say globally, is that as they start putting in these neurodiversity awareness initiatives and they start bringing this into their planning and just how they engage with each other, their productivity jumps like across the board, close to 50%. Because now they know how to drive this awesome vehicle that everybody's walking around with, rather than jumping in and going, oh shoot, this was a 6-speed and I wasn't expecting that. I wanted an automatic. Like, we have to be able to train on those skills so we can drive our brain to that productivity. The best practices that come in is obviously, if there's no awareness of neurodiversity, is to give that to the team. This is kind of what we started out with. This is the basics of this is what neurodiversity is. This is neuroinclusion. So we can use common language. And then by using assessments and really honing in on the areas that are underdeveloped for a team or for an organization to facilitate that application. I come from an educational background, so I understand when we're developing and with human behavior as well, it doesn't just happen because we understand it cognitively. It has to be facilitated and scaffolded, put in place And then accountability a lot of time with that application. So we don't end up having a summer camp experience. This is so wonderful. Look at what I did, but bringing it into the environment fully and digesting it. So for those tools and strategies that have been identified, whether it's a time awareness ratio and applying a weekly schedule design or establishing different communication styles or mediums, taking that knowledge and actually putting it into play. That is a huge factor for tapping into this pool of people that haven't been until recently. Actually, many companies have, what they've done is they've shifted and adjusted their hiring practices so that they can access that talent pool. So rather than the traditional way of going through the application, going through an interview, it's facilitated where questions are put out and they give their response in writing ahead of time. And then it's discussed. So it's more of a collaborative approach, or they come in as within a program and they go through the training that the idea is they lead into a position so that the employers get to see, what are the accommodations that we can adjust with that can access this person's brilliance that we need. And then how do we not miss out on those that cannot or are not able to easily access the traditional application and onboarding process. I mean, for me, that's those things is really about understanding where the data is about initially bringing them on and onboarding, identifying what areas need to be supported in accommodation, trainings, or otherwise, and then really that facilitation together.
Yeah. So let's I know we've got some questions that have come in, and I know we want to kind of recap what we've talked about and hit those questions. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we know is that we can harness a higher level of productivity, right, Stina? I mean, if we can bring a team together and harness everyone's strengths, it makes a lot of sense. And we've always, for years anyway, talked about, the right person in the right seat on the bus, going the right direction. Have we really thought that through in terms, we've thought it through in terms of skill sets, hard skills, physical skills? Have we thought about it in terms of their executive functioning skills? Are they in that right seat based on the ability that they have, the way that they think, the way that they can communicate? Are they in the most productive spot for us? And if not, how do we get them there, right? I saw one of the comments from Brian is that they've trained coaches to coach neurodivergent workers, right? So if we have folks who need some additional training, then let's get them that, right? If we identify someone who is neurodivergent and needs a little bit of extra oomph from us, let's get them that to keep them in the right seat so that they are productive for us.
And get those coaches in touch with us.
Right.
In all of our world.
So Tina or Stina, you want to go ahead and handle the questions here?
Yeah. Let's see. So my son adopted has PTSD from abuse growing up. PTSD impairs executive function. He has long COVID, which has impacted his ability to assess his memory, not his memory itself. This has further impaired his executive function. What can I do to help him strengthen his executive function? So if it is around the area of retaining, I would follow up with some questions here. Is if it's retaining information long enough to apply it, that's working memory within executive function. The easiest way while you're strengthening that is you want to put in tools in place. There's a lot of technology, but also recognizing where is the limit, where's the breaking point. So is it 1, 2, 3 steps? Is it receiving information verbally versus written? Is there a difference with those mediums? But if it's something that's impacting his work, I would say always have something set up where the steps can be referenced, the directives can be referenced, and then having him note along the way. I wonder if maybe he starts a task and then hits a point and something happens to pull him off, and then it's hard to transition back in or remember where he was at. He's going to want to make some side notes. So you can simply create, if it's handwritten, you do it on the side, on the rim. this is where I was going next. It can be a voice note, even outlining out my day. This is where I was going next. So there's less of that kind of pause and freeze when trying to come back to it. I could see that being something. Let me think, is there anything else in there? You also working memory is a muscle. So you doing even simple training exercises along the way to strengthen those pathways is going to be helpful. So it doesn't have to be specifically work related or something of serious task. It could be something that is a game. I mean, I have lots of access and tools for that, just to keep working at it so that that muscle can continue to strengthen and then transfer that into the work environment. What are some tips to building in that reinforcement mid-process rather than being hardwired to completion? So the reinforcement for completing tasks, task management, are we talking about the reinforcers?
Yeah, I think that popped in when we were talking about me pulling people away from the puzzles when they didn't have a chance to finish them. And so for me, I mean, when I see a question like that, where I go to is, so if you have a long project and there are multiple project points that are perfect for check-ins, right? Like, hey, step one is complete. Let's review that before we move on. There's a great spot to reinforce. Hey, love what you did here. This went well. Let's debrief how everything, went. What can we improve before we move on to step two? So those are the little reinforcing points that we can do. So often we do wait till the end of the game to say, hey, great game, kid, right? Instead of saying, hey, we can still say, hey, great, great inning, great at bat, great pitch, right? We can give those little feedbacks along the way that are reinforcers with, the bonus or the dinner out or whatever your big reinforcer is at the end of the project, right? So those are, I think, the ways that you build the reinforcers in mid-process. And again, it doesn't even have to be, anything necessarily planned out, right? It could just be me and Stina sitting down saying, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? I'm here for you. How can I help you debrief what's going on? I mean, that in and of itself is a reinforcer meeting for her so that she knows that her boss hasn't just let her flounder out there. So breaking those bigger projects down to chunks is huge. Yeah.
And just being specific in that reinforcement. Great job with this. I really appreciated how you did this. So being specific, and that's going to really also ping and allow that person to continue on with that, but then also look for other opportunities of how else can I get this feedback. So that's coming from external. So for reinforcers that are internal, it's identifying what are the things that are my dopamine sources. So I get a dopamine source from taking a walk outside, from even a cup of coffee. These types of things are small that you can do yourself as well with managing that in. So I know if I have to do a report and reports are not my favorite thing to do, obviously. I don't think anybody loves writing reports. But I will have sandwiched in something like, when I get to this point that's chunked out, I get to do something that's a dopamine source.
Yep.
So, okay. So I don't know if we'll make it through all the questions. I will say what we do is we will be sending out written out responses by not the ones that we didn't get through and probably the ones that we already spoke to as well. The hiring process. How can I bring my stuff to my leader? I think these ones I would love to break down just some more steps for you. So we'll respond to this with a follow-up email for sure.
I think, Stina, one of the things you and I can do too is maybe answer these in a video and send out a link to them.
Yeah, we could do. That's great. We'll do it both. We're going to communicate multiple meetings.
And Borth, I see you have a question too. Yeah, I can definitely speak to that for you, Borth. There is a big difference in my mind between what we have talked about today and simply relying on a DISC assessment.
Yes.
And in just quick overview. To me, DISC assessment labels someone as you are this style, right? And then we can use our training to figure out how we can interact. I mean, I've done DISC, facilitation. I get it. But it doesn't necessarily identify that someone is neurodivergent. Okay. It just identifies a different communication style, a different behavior style. And so I think really, there's a layer there.
Yeah. And that's that's the label of this is who you are, what you are. The assessments on executive function is really targeting to make that change for the do. Like, how are you going to do it? How are you going to change your actions? So what we had just up there, if you would like to schedule with us, we are offering, because we know this time goes so fast, you just want to use the scheduling link. If you put in the note free EF, that's going to be a free consult, or if you'd like to do one of these assessments and get some feedback for yourself, that's always on the table, as well as here's the feedback form that we always like to get when doing these events. It's helpful for us to polish things up for the next ones. So you can scan that QR code, enter the code inclusion for Ed and I. And then just throwing up all of our information between Ed and I. If you'd like to connect with us, we're both on LinkedIn, but this also is our direct ways to get in touch with us, our lines and emails.
So as a final thought, Stina, while folks are processing all this last bit of data from us, when we did a bit of a brain dump on you in the last hour, right? So
we did.
Take some time to process through it, to take a look at your notes. The offer, I love the fact that, when Stina said, hey, let's offer them, some free time with us. I'm all about that, because this is a heady issue. No pun intended there. This is a heady issue, right? Yeah. And so, if you got to process a little bit and say, hey, I'd still like to have some questions about how I can make this work in my workplace. We'd love to have that discussion with you. Because this really, if you can get on this bandwagon, you are going to be ahead of the curve that's coming. And it's really going to separate you from the rest of the pack. And so that goes back to one of the questions about the applicant process and that sort of thing. So as I said, we'll put a little video together with some of these answers and shoot that out to the attendees.
I like that idea of offering in multiple mediums. And really, it's I hate to say it, but we're almost to that point where folks are going to be catching up, because so many of the large companies and companies around the world have already integrated these practices. And so it is really important. And like I told you, Ed, and we talked about, it's a wave. It's coming. And are we ready for it?